नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय। ॐ नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय। तदोपसंहृत्य गिरा सहस्रनीय विमुक्तसङ्गं मन आदिपुरुषे कृष्णे लसत्पीतपते चतुर्भुजे पुरस्थिते मीलिता दृग्वद्धारया। तदोपसंहृत्य गिरा सहस्रनीय विमुक्तसङ्गं मन आदिपुरुषे कृष्णे लसत्पीतपते चतुर्भुजे पुरस्थिते मीलिता दृग्व्यधारयत्। प्रसंहृत्य गिरा सहस्रनीय विमुक्तसङ्गं मन आदिपुरुषे कृष्णे लसत्पीतपते चतुर्भुजे पुरस्थिते मीलिता दृग्व्यधारयत्। तदोपसंहृत्य गिरा सहस्रनीय मन आदिपुरुषे कृष्णे लसत्पीतपते चतुर्भुजे पुरस्थिते मीलिता दृग्वद्धारयत्। गिरा सहस्रनीय विमुक्तसङ्गं मन आदिपुरुषे कृष्णे लसत्पीतपते चतुर्भुजे पुरस्थिते मीलिता दृग्व्यधारयत्। Anyone else? Translation by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Thereupon that man who spoke on different subjects with thousands of meanings and who fought on thousands of battlefields and protected thousands of men stopped speaking and, being completely freed from all bondage, withdrew his mind from everything else and fixed his wide-open eyes upon the original personality of Godhead, Sri Krishna, who stood before him, four-handed, dressed in yellow garments that glittered and shined. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. In the momentous hour of leaving his material body, Bhishmadev set the glorious example concerning the important function of the human form of life. The subject matter which attracts the dying man becomes the beginning of his next life. Therefore, if one is absorbed in thoughts of the Supreme Lord Sri Krishna, he is sure to go back to Godhead without any doubt. This is confirmed in the Bhagavad Gita, chapter 8, text 5 through 15. Anyone would like to read? And whoever at the time of death quits his body remembering me alone, at once attains my nature. Of this there is no doubt. Whatever state of being one remembers when he quits his body, that state he will attain without fail. Therefore, Arjuna, you should always think of me in the form of Krishna, and at the same time carry out your prescribed duty of fighting. With your activities dedicated to me, and your mind and intelligence fixed on me, you will attain me without doubt. He who meditates on the Supreme Personality of Godhead, his mind constantly engaged and remembering me, undeviated from the path, he, O Partha, Arjuna, is sure to reach me. One should meditate upon the Supreme Person as the one who knows everything, as he who is the oldest, who is the controller, who is smaller than the smallest, who is the maintainer of everything, who is beyond all material conception, who is inconceivable, and who is always a person. Always a person. He is luminous like the sun, and being transcendental is beyond this material nature. One who, at the time of death, fixes his life air between the eyebrows, and in full devotion engages himself in remembering the Supreme Lord, will certainly attain to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Persons learned in the Vedas who utter Omkar, and who are great sages in the renounced order, enter into Brahman. Desiring such perfection, one practices celibacy. I shall now explain to you this process by which one may attain salvation. The yogic situation is that of detachment from all sensual engagements, closing all the doors of the senses and fixing the mind on the heart and the life air at the top of the head. One establishes himself in yoga. After being situated in this yoga practice and vibrating the sacred syllable Om, the supreme combination of letters, if one thinks of the Supreme Personality of Godhead and quits his body, he will certainly reach the spiritual planets. For one who remembers me without deviation, I am easy to obtain, O son of Pratha, because of his constant engagement in devotional service. After attaining me, the great souls who are yogis in devotion never return to this temporary world, which is full of miseries, because they have attained the highest perfection. Sri Bhishmadev attained the perfection of quitting his body at will, and was fortunate enough to have Lord Krishna, the object of his attention, personally present at the time of death. He therefore fixed his open eyes upon him. He wanted to see Sri Krishna for a long time out of his spontaneous love for him. Because he was a pure devotee, he had very little to do with the detailed performance of yogic principles. Simple bhakti yoga is enough to bring about perfection. Therefore, the ardent desire of Bhishmadev was to see the person of Lord Krishna, the most lovable object, and by the grace of the Lord, Sri Bhishmadev had this opportunity at the last stage of his breathing. Translation, thereupon that man who spoke on different subjects with thousands of meanings, and who fought on thousands of battlefields, and protected thousands of men, stopped speaking, and being completely freed from all bondage, withdrew his mind from everything else, and fixed his wide open eyes upon the original personality of Godhead, Sri Krishna, who stood before him four-handed, dressed in yellow garments that glittered and shined. I hear some music.
From the kitchen.
Oh, wow.
I don't know why they don't listen to class, man. They listen to some jam.
Better. That's better. Okay. Just wasn't in the right position. I'm too short. Yeah, it would be great if it was like right here. No, it went lower. I want it lower. Yeah. Like right here. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, I was just speaking with my wife earlier this morning how it seems like it's very significant that Prabhupada included 10 verses from the Gita verbatim in order in the purport. So I wanted to do a little bit of investigation. So I read Prabhupada's translations and purports in the Gita for these 10 verses, and then I read the commentary by Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur for these 10 verses. And it's very fascinating, the conclusion. Everyone who is attempting to remember Krishna and the activity of remembering Krishna is all auspicious, there's no doubt. But our acharyas made the point that there are different methods for remembering Krishna. And corresponding to each of those methods are different motivations, perhaps. We know that of the 4 types that approach the Lord, who have material desires, is one type. But even more subtly contaminated, perhaps. But actually, in the purports of these verses in the Gita, Prabhupada actually made it a point to say that anything and everything except bhakti is mechanical. And Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, he actually elaborates on this idea in his writing extensively about how any process, any mechanical process or any process is lifeless. It's like a dead body. without bhakti. And bhakti is like the soul. So you have the bhakti that gives life to these processes, these mechanical processes. So some of these verses describe the process of mechanically withdrawing the mind from the senses and making the mind still so it becomes easier to remember Krishna. And Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur says that the last two verses specifically point to pure devotional service, bhakti, without any interruption by any other process, including jnana yoga or ashtanga yoga. And I was thinking about this mechanical process idea and how we interact with the modes of material nature in a very subtle way. For example, withdrawing the mind from the senses. The mind is a subtle element, and when we withdraw the mind from the senses, we are interacting with matter. Jnana yoga, we are interacting with the intelligence. I actually read this morning how the mind is actually what makes the decision, and the intelligence is what gives the determination to execute that decision. But in the last two verses, it talks about pure bhakti, whereas there's no aspect of anything mechanical. So what is the substance and the essence of that pure bhakti? And that is desire. And what is desire? I was meditating on this yesterday. Desire is simply a longing. It's the actual function of the Atma, to long, to want, to feel lacking, to be needing, to be feeling incomplete. And so that is the actual spiritual activity of the Atma, is to have that longing, a desire to commune with our Father, or depending on our relationship with Krishna, in that relationship. And the pure bhakta, it's literally letting go of everything, including the mind, including the intelligence. Something okay?
Something's not okay.
Letting go of the mind and the intelligence and just letting the soul do its work. Thank you. I can't smell because I got the mask on. And the soul's work, or the only activity of the soul, is to be incomplete without Krishna. And Lord Chaitanya, he demonstrated it in his own life. And all the Goswamis and all of our great acharyas, they taught us in the Gaudiya Vaishnava line how the process of reuniting with Krishna is the process of cultivating the mood of separation. This whole mood of separation is this longing, this desire, this wanting of the heart. So ultimately, the greatest devotees, the greatest of the greatest, they did not depend on any mechanical process for remembering Krishna. They let go of their mind, they let go of their intelligence, they let go of their false ego, and simply raised their arms and cried out to the Supreme Lord to save them and to enjoy them, to take them away, to enjoy with Krishna. This is a very beautiful chapter of the Bhagavatam, which is a part of the Mahabharata. There's so many loving exchanges between the devotees and Krishna and the devotees amongst themselves. And we can get an understanding of what this process of bhakti is if we study and hear the activities of these great souls and the activities of Krishna. I was really appreciating when I was reading this chapter. I read through the whole chapter, and I was really appreciating how Bhishma Dev made so many references to Arjuna. Have you noticed that? So many verses he's mentioning Arjuna, Arjuna this, Arjuna that. He's just so much love and affection he had for the Pandavas, and especially Arjuna. And Krishna, he arranged for the Pandavas to come to see Bhishma Dev before he had his final breath, for the whole purpose of giving pleasure to Bhishma Dev. And Bhishma Dev was glorifying Arjuna simply for the pleasure of Krishna. And our acharyas explain how Bhishma Dev was suffering inside for many, 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 many years, as we all know, to see his most beloved Pandavas to go through such difficulty and pain, tribulations in their life was, and for him to be a part of that, against his desire, of course, was excruciatingly painful for him. And Krishna knew that Bhishma Dev, it would bring immense joy to Bhishma Dev to see the Pandavas finally crowned as king, as rulers. And it's described how when they came to visit, they were in their full regalia as king. And that gave a lot of pleasure to Bhishma Dev, because that was his that was his desire. That's all he wanted to see his whole life, was to see them in that position as the king. And he got to see that. And we know in the Bhagavatam, the whole goal of the process of bhakti is to please the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Hari Toshanam. And Bhishma Dev knew the heart of Krishna. I was actually reading, this was so unbelievably beautiful. It's actually part of a story that I read about Lord Chaitanya. But we'll come back to that quote, but what Lord Chaitanya said was, if someone worships me but disrespects my devotees, it's like cutting me into millions of pieces. That worship feels like blazing fire on my body. So we know the whole goal is to please Krishna. And what pleases Krishna is pleasing the devotees. And what pleases the devotees is pleasing Krishna. And what pleases Krishna is pleasing the devotees. So it's an eternal competition of who can please who, to please everyone so that everyone can be pleased. And then ultimately Krishna can be pleased. And Srila Prabhupada writes how Bhishma Dev's Ishtadev is actually Parthasarthi in Vaikuntha. His eternal meditation is on the divine form of Krishna as the divine charioteer of Arjuna. And Prabhupada wrote that Krishna, the joy that Krishna experiences being the order carrier is the word Prabhupada likes to use, the order carrier of his devotee, is, you have two rasas. You have the Ishvara ras, which is the controller ras, and then you have the das ras, which is that of the servant. And the Krishna is the supreme controller, but he does not enjoy that ras at all. It is very uninteresting to him to be the supreme controller. Rather, he would much rather be controlled than control. In fact, Krishna's constantly longing to be das. He wants to be the servant of his devotees. And he derives so much pleasure to be the charioteer of Arjuna. Go here, okay, go here, okay. And Krishna is he's just obeying the command of his devotee. Just imagine Krishna, the charioteer of Arjuna. We hear it all the time, but just imagine, think about it. It's amazing, unbelievably amazing. And so, Bhishma Dev, to give pleasure to Krishna, is always meditating on Arjuna and his relationship with Krishna. If we think about also, I was thinking how Krishna, the service that he chose during the Rajasuya sacrifice was to wash everyone's feet. So this is very instructive. This reminded me of the one chapter in the Adi Lila Chaitanya Charitamrita describing the glories of Advaita Acharya. And when I read that chapter, I was just like, wow, this is amazing. Every verse was just even more amazing than the previous one. Just got better and better and better. And I don't know if you remember this chapter, but essentially, Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami is describing all of the great souls and explaining how the most coveted position is to be das. Do you remember this chapter? The verse talks about Lord Advaita Acharya himself and how he wants to be das. And all of the great Mahajans, how they want to be das. And then the residents of Vrindavan, the Brajavasis, how, of course, their only desire is to be das, to be the servant, the maid servants. And then Rukmini, Krishnadas Kaviraj talks about how Rukmini, there was one quote of one of the queens of Krishna. And if you read what she says when talking to, remember that past time when Draupadi came and wanted to hear from the queens of Krishna about how each of them married Krishna. They were so interested. And one of the queens, I don't remember, but it was just hearing her words would break your heart. It was just so unbelievably humble and sweet. How she said the perfection of her life would be to sweep the mudroom of Krishna's house, just become the sweeper, Krishna's house, palace. And she just considered herself a sweeper. That was the perfection of her life, to be in that position of a sweeper. And then so many personalities, I can't remember all of them, were describing their desire. Radharani, then finally Radharani, her highest aspiration is to be das. And then the culmination is, Krishnadas Kaviraj says, but even Lord Krishna himself, he wants to be servant. He wants to be the servant of the servant of the servant of the servant. And he wanted to be servant so badly that he took the form of Lord Chaitanya. That was his whole desire, was to taste the nectar ocean. I wish I could read that chapter. It's so beautiful. The nectar ocean-filled ecstasy of servitude, how it's the greatest joy and pleasure of life. This reminded me of a beautiful pastime. I'm sure most of you have heard this pastime of Advaita Acharya. Advaita Acharya was a disciple of Madhavendra Puri. And Lord Chaitanya was a disciple of Ishwara Puri, who was a disciple of Madhavendra Puri. So Advaita Acharya was on the same level as his Guru Maharaj, because his Guru Maharaj was godbrothers with Advaita Acharya. So he always treated Advaita Acharya with respect, as a superior. And this bothered Advaita Acharya very much. He was very disturbed by this because he did not want respect. He wanted the dust of Lord Chaitanya's feet on his head, like everybody else got that special mercy. But why not me? I want to get that mercy too. Everyone else has it except for me. So he was really lamenting. So he came up with this plan of inspiring Lord Chaitanya and Lord Nityananda from within to come to visit him. And when he came, or even before he came actually, Vrindavan Thakur writes that he was very enthusiastically praising the process of Gyan. I think he writes how bhakti is just a mirror. It's just reflecting the original truth of Gyan. And so it's explained, Vrindavan Thakur explained how he was getting so enthusiastic about glorifying the process of Gyan. He started rocking. It's like rocking back and forth. And Gyan is this, and Gyan is, this is like the oneness of everyone. This is the best of everything. And Lord Chaitanya he didn't even get there. He started becoming like a maddened elephant. It was explained how Lord Nityananda and Lord Chaitanya were floating down the Ganga River on their way to Advaita Acharya. And Lord Chaitanya was getting very angry, even before he got to his house. And then Lord Chaitanya came to Advaita Acharya's residence, and as he approached him, he started getting more enthusiastically glorifying Gyan. And then Lord Chaitanya was getting more and more angry. And then he said, I have a question. What is greater, Gyan or Bhakti? And Advaita Acharya was so blissed out in the ecstasy of Gyan, and that he said, Gyan is always greater than Bhakti. How can you ask this question? And Lord Chaitanya, he immediately went to the Vyasasan, where Advaita Acharya was speaking, grabbed him, and the way I like to visualize it is he grabbed him by the collar, dragged him off the seat, dragged him on the ground, and started punching him and beating him up. And he said, you woke me up from the ocean of milk to preach devotional service, and you're preaching the glories of Gyan. He was so upset. He was so angry. And Sita Devi, Lord Advaita Acharya's wife, was appealing to Lord Chaitanya that he's an old man. You're gonna kill him. He's gonna die. and you're going to be responsible. But Lord Chaitanya didn't even hear her talking, what to speak of what she was saying. He was so angry. And he started glorifying himself, which is exactly what Advaitacharya wanted to hear. He said, don't you know that I was the original Krishna, and I killed Kamsa, and I beheaded the evil demon Sishupal. It is me, it is I who did all of that. And now I came here just for you, and you woke me up, and now this is what I have to hear? And then Advaitacharya was so blissed out. He was even more blissed out now than ever before. Navnas Thakur describes how he was so happy that he was clapping his hands and kind of like rocking back and forth, and he's like, oh my God, this is an ecstasy. He said, now, Lord Chaitanya, you have strengthened my relationship with you in servitude. Thank you so much. And he was so grateful. And it's described how Lord Chaitanya felt a little embarrassed. And actually, Advaitacharya, he had the opportunity to place his head at the feet of Lord Chaitanya. He bowed at Lord Chaitanya's feet. And Lord Chaitanya couldn't do anything because he was kind of in shock. Like, what just happened? And that's when Lord Chaitanya made that quote, that said that comment, that anyone who worships me but disrespects my devotee is like cutting my body into pieces. And Advaitacharya was so happy that he was able to reclaim his coveted position of das and the das and the das, the servant of the servant and the servant. And the aftermath of that whole experience was very touching. It described how everyone was crying, rivers of tears. Even Lord Chaitanya was crying rivers of tears. Advaitacharya was crying rivers of tears. Sita Devi was crying rivers of tears. Haridas Thakur, just to see the mercy that Advaitacharya received. Everyone was just in a pool of tears, just crying and crying and crying. It was very touching, the description. I'm not doing it justice, but such a touching scene. But yeah, this it's kind of, we have to kind of swallow our pride to think of ourselves as a das. And I remember my Guru Maharaj, he, in a lecture, after joining the ISKCON movement, he learned the etiquette of signing every letter as your servant. So he wrote a letter. So he wrote a letter to his parents, and he signed your servant. Did you hear the story? And his dad was so furious. He's like, I raised you. I spent so much money to raise you. I gave everything. I just like shed gallons of blood just to raise you nicely, and now you're a servant? What is this? And my Guru Maharaj, he said, I was very enthusiastic in those days. So I said, oh, I'm so sorry. I meant the servant of your servants. But in all seriousness, this mood of das is, you can derive the greatest ecstasy. So much so that Krishna himself, all he wants to do, to be, is to be das. And this mood of being servant is the essential underpinning of the desire to please. This is the whole process. To serve means to please. It is putting the happiness of others in front of our own, where their happiness is our own happiness. And that is the whole goal of this service. There was another very famous pastime and to illustrate, actually, before this incident took place, there was a very interesting, fascinating pastime that took place, that Vrindavan Thakur writes in Chaitanya Bhagavat. It's about how Lord Chaitanya and Lord Nityananda visited a householder sannyasi. Have you ever heard of such a thing? Householder sannyasi? Not in ISKCON. But it was so hilarious. It was unbelievable, that pastime. And the householder sannyasi gave a benediction to Lord Chaitanya that may you obtain wealth and women and happiness and material enjoyment. And Lord Chaitanya was correcting him. He's like, what is this? You should be blessing people with the love of Krishna, with devotion. Why are you blessing me with love? And this householder sannyasi said, look at this. This child who's still drinking milk from his mother is now trying to tell me what is what. Just see Kali Yuga, this degradation. And then Lord Nityananda said, don't just ignore the bantering of this child. He doesn't know your glories. And the householder brahmachari, the householder sannyasi said, he felt very good. Yes, I am glorious. Thank you. Thank you very much. Yes, I agree. And he felt so good from Lord Nityananda's kind of flattering that he invited them for lunch. So Lord Chaitanya and Lord Nityananda, they ate lunch at his house. Can you believe it? They actually ate lunch at his house. And then the householder sannyasi said, would you like some ananda? And Lord Chaitanya said, ananda? What is this ananda? And Lord Nityananda said, wine. Ananda means wine. And Lord Nityananda, he said, I think we better leave now. And Lord Chaitanya he put his hand on his head, and it's just like, oh my God, what are we doing? And they kind of ran away as fast as they could. But Vrindavan Das Thakur, he explains how this is a very profound meaning behind this pastime, because Lord Chaitanya and Lord Nityananda, they came to deliver the drunkards and the most sinful class of people, that they actually ate lunch at his house. And just actually even tolerated hearing his nonsense. They actually listened. They didn't run away. They actually heard all this nonsense. And just tolerated hearing them, ate lunch and talked to them and everything. But Lord Chaitanya would not do that to the Mayavadi sannyasis from Varanasi. He would not give that same mercy that he would to the drunkards, which is very significant. That and this ties in with the pastime with Advaitacharya, and how Lord Chaitanya responded so vehemently and strongly with so much anger, is that there's nothing more sinful than denying the existence of God. And also, on top of that, to add insult to injury, is to present oneself as the knower of Vedanta. That hypocrisy of presenting oneself as the knower of Vedanta and decrying the existence of God in the name of the Vedas was the most detestable action for Lord Chaitanya. He was merciful to every other class of people, the drunkards and the meat eaters and the gamblers and the prostitutes, no problem. But if you take the name of the Vedas and you say and deny the existence of God, those blasphemers will be never get the mercy of Lord Chaitanya. So it's very significant. And the other pastime, which illustrates another lesson, which is similar, which ties into what we can learn from the pastime of Vaitacharya, wanting to be absorbed in dasya bhav, and not being the guru. Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur would always say that all of my disciples are my gurus. A real guru never considers himself a guru. There was a story of how Sachi Mata, she mentally, actually I'm not sure, maybe mentally or verbally, she criticized Advaitacharya because he influenced her older one to take sannyas, and now she saw the same activities with Lord Chaitanya, and saying I forget the exact word she used, but he's spreading the network of illusion. He was finding fault with Advaitacharya. And so someone approached Advaitacharya saying that Lord Chaitanya is saying that he can't give the love of God to Sachi Mata because she offended you. And Advaitacharya was just offended me. I'm just a sinful wretch. How can anyone offend me? And Sachi Deva, the mother of God, I can't tolerate this. And he was just glorifying Sachi Mata. So he just kept on glorifying, and his ecstasy was just getting greater and bigger, and he just couldn't control himself, and finally he just passed out. And Sachi Mata, when he was passed out, Sachi Mata grabbed some dust from his feet and placed it on her head. So what to speak of us, the Mother of God, Lord Chaitanya doesn't tolerate the so-called appearance of disrespecting the devotees of the Lord. And the Lord, as I mentioned, the Lord said, if you worship me and disrespect my devotees, it's like cutting my body into millions and millions of pieces. It's like burning, scorching fire against my body. This is such the gravity of disrespecting the Vaishnavas. It's already 9 o'clock. Wow. I guess we can end here. Just one thing I was thinking about is how, from just like kind of ontological appreciation of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And it's using the process of logic to understand how sublime the mood of love is. That Krishna, one rasa is that he is self-satisfied. He's Amarama. But at the same time, he wants love. So if you think about it, if God wants love, that means he doesn't have all the love he wants, right? Because you can't want something if you already have it. So if someone wants something, then obviously you can't control it. Because if you control that thing that you want, you wouldn't want it, because you control it, right? Does that make sense? So if he wants if he wants love, that means he can't control it. And if you can't control it, if you can't control something, then you become subordinate to it, right? That means if you can't control it, then it controls you. So the Acharyas explain that Krishna is not just theoretically controlled by love. He is actually controlled by love, because by his will, anyone who wants to love him has to do it out of their own free will. And if they're doing it out of their own free will, Krishna cannot control that. So love is greater than Krishna. And you know how Prabhupada always says that we don't want to become one with Krishna. We want to become greater than Krishna. Because love is the repository of love is in the heart of the devotee. Therefore, because Krishna is subordinate to that love, he considers the devotee to be greater than himself. And there's this verse, one of my favorite verses that Queen Kunti, he prays, because the doubt is sometimes raised that so Krishna, is he pretending, he's actually really the Supreme Personality of Godhead, but is he pretending to be the servant, or is he actually the servant? So Queen Kunti, in her prayers, in that famous verse, Kopyada de Toikutagasitam Yate Dasasu Kadinajana Sambramaksha, that when I visualize the pastime of Yashoda chasing after Krishna, and Krishna trembling in fear with tears rolling down his eyes and this mascara being smeared in his eyes, I'm just bewildered. And the Acharyas explained that Queen Kunti is a great Mahajan. For her to become bewildered is not an ordinary thing. So the reason why she's bewildered is because Krishna is feared by fear personified, and yet he's afraid of Yashoda, and yet he's not pretending to be afraid. He's actually afraid of Krishna, and that is because he's actually subordinate to love. He's not theoretically subordinate to love. He's actually subordinate to love, and is conquered by love, and is controlled by love, and is subservient to love. Thank you. Hare Krishna. Would anyone like to say something? Anything? Madhumati, would you like to say something?
In your class about how Krishna's, especially the last point you made, you explained so nicely about how Krishna is controlled by love. He's Atmaram, but he wants love. Yes, yeah, these pastimes are pretty good. Thank you for explaining.
Any realizations to share, Mataji?
There's one question.
Oh, one question. Kunja? Oh.
This is from Mahavishnu Priya Mataji.
Oh, wow.
When it says, remembering Krishna without deviation, what does that mean specifically? Remembering moment to moment or regularly worshipping over many years in time?
Excellent question. That may not answer that question, but it did remind me of something very important that Srila Prabhupada said, and Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur both in their commentaries, that these 10 verses, there's actually a very logical progression from one verse to the next. And one of the verses, Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, he writes that it's not possible to remember Krishna at the time of death if we don't remember him throughout our life. So this is satatam, right? Always in your life, you need to be remembering Krishna. Because I've heard actually this question being asked many times that, can we just do whatever we want and then we just have a picture of Krishna or something at the time of our death and just remember Krishna? But our acharyas very clearly state that your life has to be a life of devotion to Krishna, with constant remembrance. Otherwise, it's not possible to remember Krishna at the time of death. It's not possible. As far as the remembrance of Krishna, like I was talking about at the beginning of the class, how Vishnu Chakravarti Thakur, he actually dissects these 10 verses, and each one indicating various levels of yoga. And some forms of yoga, like karma yoga, jnana yoga, jnana mishra yoga, like ashtanga yoga. And the last verse, 14 and 15, is kevala bhakti, which is only bhakti, without any tinge of jnana or any other process. So the process that we really, our only responsibility is to let go. We're not actually doing anything, we're just letting go. And when we let go, it's explained that the Tatashta Shakti, which is marginal energy, it is so small, it is anu, that it cannot independently exist. It has to be subordinate or has to take shelter of matter or in the internal energy, the superior energy. Inferior energy or superior energy. It cannot have an existence of its own. So, if we want to practice pure bhakti, Srila Prabhupada would always say, you have to cry like a baby cries for its mother. We have that crying has to be there, of just helplessness, that surrender. And Krishna, and it's that feeling of emptiness that actually enables us to remember Krishna. It's not a mechanical process. Again, that's what Srila Prabhupada and Acharyas were explaining, that bhakti is not a mechanical process. It's not like you have a picture of Krishna and you stare at it and you just try to memorize. Like, it's not like a mechanical, it's not in your control. But Krishna, the remembrance of Krishna becomes effortless when we let go. When we let go of all of these vices, anger, lust, greed, illusion, and when we let go of these shackles that are preventing us from remembering Krishna. So we're not actually the doers in remembering Krishna. We're actually submitting ourselves to Krishna for Him to appear in our life. So the reason why I'm answering the question in this way is I just wanted to reiterate this point that bhakti, that remembrance of Krishna, always remember Krishna and never forgetting Krishna, is not a mechanical thing. It's not a mechanical process. My Guru Maharaj actually gave an incredibly beautiful class about if somebody his heart is hard, intoxicated with pride, and he controls his mind, and it's not deviating anywhere, and he's focusing on the holy name, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, that mantra won't touch his Atma. Because the pride, he's just puffed up and proud in chanting the holy name. He might be with attention, but he's puffed up and proud, and that's going to prevent the holy name from actually attracting our attention, So in the same way, remembering Krishna is not a mechanical thing. Remembering Krishna is letting go of our prestige, of our pride, of our attachment to our Janmaisha Shuddha Madhapaman, our high birth, education, the pride for our reputation, just letting go of everything. And Krishna makes remembrance of Him possible in our life, in the proper mood. Okay. The question is, how does sadhana help? Sadhana helps when we take shelter of sadhana. Sadhana does not help if we take control of sadhana. So, I've heard this in the class where devotees in their immature enthusiasm, perhaps, said, I'm going to live in Radhakund, I'm going to chant 192 rounds, and I'm going to drink 1 cup of buttermilk a day. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. So this is when we are controlling our sadhana, correct? That we are like, I want this, so I'm going to do this, and I'm going to get that. That's controlling our sadhana. So, my Guru Maharaj said in another class, he said, don't plan your emancipation. Don't plan your prema, when I want to get prema bhakti on the 5th of July. 5 years from now, I'm going to, fast once a week, and then next year I'll fast twice a week, and then by the 5th year, on the 5th of July, I'm going to have love of God. Sadhana is receiving. It's not doing, it's receiving. So when we receive the mercy of the holy name, we receive the mercy of the Bhagavatam, when we hear, when we chant, and we remember, it's all mercy. It's all receiving. We cannot create the holy name by moving our lips and our tongue. It's not like we're creating the holy name. No. We are attracting the holy name to appear in our mind, in our consciousness, by endeavoring, showing Krishna that we want love of God, we want to love Him for His pleasure. We don't want love of God for our pleasure. We want Krishna prema for Krishna's pleasure. Krishna is very pleased when His devotees have love of God. That's what all the great souls who have prema bhakti is because it's pleasing to Krishna. Otherwise, they wouldn't have prema bhakti. Does that answer your, or did you even have a question? I forgot now. Yeah, sadhana, correct. Yeah. Anyways, I never really answer questions. It's just an excuse for me to ramble, probably. But you probably know the answer much better than I do, but that's just inspired me to say something. Hare Krishna. Grantachu Bhagavatam ki jai. Hari Bol.